So hello everyone and welcome along to another edition of the Integral Health Podcast with me, Ben Calder. And it's my absolute pleasure today to welcome my longtime friend and colleague, Phil Clubley, along to the show today. Hi, Phil.
Hi, Ben. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. It's so nice to have you here. Like Phil is another kinesiologist. He is also the current chairman of the Kinesiology Federation here in the UK. And he and I have exchanged ideas about kinesiology for, it's got to be over 10 years now.
It's got to be over 10 years. Yeah, it's been like we were children, I'm sure, when we when we first met.
And I think in comparison to how I am now, how we were then, yeah, definitely seems like a youthful, juvenile stage of development. That's really the case. So, Phil, just for anybody, because today we're going to talk about kinesiology. I've not taken a show to talk about kinesiology before, which is kind of my main therapeutic intervention with people. And so it's really nice to have you here so we can have this discussion. But just for people that have maybe not come across kinesiology before, what would be your kind of potted introduction to what you do and why it's good for people?
The old chestnut of how to describe kinesiology in 2 sentences. Normally what I say about kinesiology is it's just a way of accessing a person's subconscious. When some people are working with muscle testing, they say we're working with the energy system or the higher self, and I also go with that terminology as well. But I just think it's a lovely way of getting into our subconscious, finding out things that may be affecting us that we're not conscious of. When we're conscious of something, we can address it. We know it's there. But when something's unconscious, we're not always able to address it. And with muscle testing, we're able to access that part of the energy system, the subconscious, and get a response from the body. I guess in terms of if I'm introducing somebody to it, then I'll just ask what's going on in their life and give them an example of where kinesiology has maybe been useful in the past. But I mean, as you'll know, it's just got such a broad range of applications, because whereas the muscle testing aspect isn't actually healing, it's finding out what a person needs to do in order to bring some balance into their life. So it can be nutritional change, it can be exercise or activity, it can be relationship related. It can be the way people face problems that they're coming at them from the wrong angle. So in a nutshell.
I love that as well, in the fact that we're identifying with the unconscious in there, because I would also in my work talk about it like we're talking to the unconscious. But I think people sometimes see that as an ethereal thing rather than actually a very solid physical thing. Like you're unconscious of the mechanism that makes your hair grow. You're unconscious of the mechanism that produces digestive enzymes or replaces your skin cells. So the unconscious is a purely physical thing as well. And when we consider how many biological processes are taking place in our body per second, we have absolutely no idea about. We really are working into that aspect of the unconscious. It's its physical self, as well as its kind of mental emotional self, as well as its environmental awareness, from what we're breathing in or what we're taking in water, as well as our cultural relational thing. How many
absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we're a passenger in our own body. It's like, my body and everything that goes on, that's not me. The aspect that makes me just happens to be present in this body, which is a factory that's running 24 hours a day, and I'm absolutely clueless to most of what's going on in there. Our conscious mind is a tiny percent of what's going on. So once we can start actively finding out information through feedback from this amazing system, we can make huge changes with minimal effort, which is what I love about it. I love the minimal effort aspect.
Absolutely. And I think people as well, we we have evolved into a culture, into a type of being that sees itself at the apex of its own evolutionary development. And from that point of view, and I love Peter Levine talking about this, he talks about the body not being a top-down system that's controlled through consciousness down, but actually a bottom-up system. And he kind of quotes research within that shows that the body will actually start to react to things in its environment a good half a second before the mind starts to create any conscious awareness of that or frame any thought around that. So, and I really think we've lost a lot of connection to what is going on in that body awareness, that enteric nervous system. And so we're just this kind of high-flying celebrity, as you say, the passenger in our own body, walking around, not realizing that there's this whole crew of people that are facilitating every single step that you take, you know, and that's where we are.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, and you know, it's like you say, the brain, or the conscious brain, is always so far behind everything else. I mean, there's loads of research at the moment about the gut being the first brain, and that kind of makes a lot of sense, because very often we will absolutely feel something before we're consciously aware of why we feel that thing. And you know, I always say, you know, the gut is the first brain that responds to a situation. It feels something, it intuits something. The heart then gets involved and starts putting some feeling into that. And then our brain gets involved, and our brain's like, you know, it's like this Larry thing that has no idea what's going on. And it's just got the loudest voice. And your intuition's going, no, please listen to me. And the brain's going, Whoa! And it's just like, yeah, it's like, and again, that's what's brilliant about kinesiology, is taking the brain out of it. You know, when you've got a client in and they kind of go, how do I know I won't be influencing the work that's coming up? And it's like, your brain won't stand a chance. It's like, I will be so far ahead of where your brain is. By the time your brain's listening to my question, I'll be another 2 questions in. And so I think that's what's brilliant about it, is you're almost taking out that conscious link that could potentially start to influence the way a session goes.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's important, though, for anybody listening to realize that as kinesiologists, this doesn't mean that we have unfettered access into your system. Your body is always caring for you at quite a high degree. It's not just going to allow us to willy-nilly run.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I, you know, it's like if I do muscle testing training on workshops or talks or anything, it's like you only ever ask questions that you've got permission to ask, and you ask them openly of that person. And it's like, as soon as you're asking questions that the client hasn't given you permission to ask, you're going to get nonsense responses, because that energy system will absolutely defend itself.
Yeah. And I don't think people actually realize how much their bodies are already doing what we do anyway. And like, one of the descriptions that I talk to with my clients, especially when they first come in to see me, is about how you've had these responses and your body's actually showing you all of this stuff already all the time. Like, if you get a bad piece of news, there's that sync in the system. You get good news, yay! You see somebody you don't like, you see somebody you do like, yay! You go to a place that you're not comfortable in, you go to a place you love, yay! So those mechanisms are already present for you throughout your whole life. We're just never taught to observe them, which I see as part of our role as kinesiologists, is to help people recognize that they were already doing what we were doing, just in a little different way.
Yeah, and I think sort of slightly further to that as well is, you know, having that feeling of walking into a space and going, ugh, you know, feeling uncomfortable, but actually then acknowledging that that's the way you feel. Because again, as human beings, we're very good at thinking, oh, this feels uncomfortable, I'll do something to mask the discomfort. Instead of actually thinking, oh, why is me meeting this person made me feel uncomfortable? It's like, oh, I'll turn around and walk in this direction instead. And again, what the subconscious mind then is doing is it's going, right, this information, we've taken this information in, it hasn't been processed, so now we're going to have to hold on to it until a time when it is processed. And then, you know, old Larry brain's going, oh, we don't need to worry about that, have a beer, watch some telly. And so the unconscious then saying, right, we'll store that in our little filing cabinet.
Yeah.
And then every little thing that happens, I always say about trauma that sometimes people think that trauma is like a massive event. It's like a car accident or a divorce, but it's like any impact on the body that the body takes as a detrimental stimulus is trauma. And if we don't deal with it and address it, it's going to continue to be locked up to a point where we have no choice but to address it.
Yeah. And I also recognize that within the body as well, we can respond and we can be triggered on an unconscious level with things that aren't a problem and aren't a threat. And there's a balance between that bulldozing on anyway with where the mind wants to go and constantly responding to what the body thinks is taking place, and having a middle ground where we actually check in and go, is there something in this that's valid? Because like you say, there could be birth trauma, there could be other stuff. And when Peter Levine talks about trauma, he talks about it as a shock that never got integrated. So it was given a space to actually be explored and to then unpack and process. And even really quite strong stuff, if it's given the right environment immediately, the body will process through it really quick. But if it doesn't, like you say, it holds on and it stores that. And then it can start to build layers up around it and it becomes a much bigger issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it Peter Levine who wrote the trauma book?
The In an Unspoken Voice and Waking the Tiger.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, because I was just thinking about that and the trauma and the way animals deal with it, which you really see. Our cats brought a bird in the other day, and it was still very much alive in our kitchen. And I sort of put a towel on it and I took it outside, and I wasn't sure what condition it was in at that point, and sort of opened the towel up and it hopped on the bird feeder, and you kind of almost just saw it sort of freeze for a moment, decide what it needed to do, and then it just shot off like a bullet from a gun. And I thought, yeah, you're going to be fine, because it released all its trauma in the speed that it had left. And I know from my own experiences, if I've had a traumatic experience, and I'm sort of thinking one specifically a few years ago when my daughter was ill, and I actually went into a very shaky response, and even though it's not very useful at the time to kind of be shaking away, you also know that it's your body actually processing that stuff, and I think I came out of that better than I could have done had I just really held on to the trauma of that situation. And I think I was in a car accident as well, and again there's that thing where you get out the car, you kind of make sure you've got all the bits you went in with, and then you go into that sort of shock response. And it's really important, I think, to have the body release that nervous energy that's built up through that situation. It's an interesting one, trauma as a concept and an idea.
Yeah, really. Yeah. So I want to just take a little step back as well. What got you interested in doing kinesiology? What was your driver at the time? And what's kept you motivated to keep practicing now for all these years? I mean, and again, just remind us when you first qualified, so we get an idea of that time scale.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I was one of those husbands who was dragged to a session by my wife. So when you say what was the driver that led you to it, it was literally my wife. Back in 2007, my wife had some really serious intolerances to foods, and she was really struggling, and she was really unwell with it. And as she was trying to find out what she could and couldn't eat, she was sort of losing weight, and as she has diabetes as well, it was really interfering with her diet and her control. And so she tried a few various things, and she was in a health food shop, and they suggested kinesiology. And like a lot of people who'd never heard of it, struggled to Google it because you can't even spell it. The fact that we're saying it differently as well, just again, you say kinesiology, which a lot of people do, and a lot of people still say kinesiology, although I think your pronunciation is more accurate. So she came home, Googled it. We found a practitioner in York. She went, and within a couple of sessions, it turned her diet around. At the same time, I was suffering with a shoulder injury, which I think I'd had for a couple of years. I used to work in a cinema in Leeds, and we used to carry films downstairs, and films were huge, you know, could easily be sort of 5 foot across, and you'd have one under your arm. And I tripped on a step, and the film hit the step and jarred up into my shoulder, and it caused a problem. And I'd been seeing a chiropractor for all that time, and it would ease it, or it would suddenly move to the other shoulder, which was always very, very bizarre. And so my wife said, "Oh, go and try some kinesiology and see if that'll sort it out." And I kind of harumphed and thought I couldn't possibly do it. You know, this is, you know, the kind of kinesiology it wasn't a physical therapy. It was all about thinking, and I'm sure there were some crystals involved, and it all sounded like absolute hokum to me. And so I begrudgingly went and paid my money, and just had the most enlightening experience of my life. It was, you know, it was so weird, but kind of so pertinent. And so I ended up needing 4 sessions for the work I was going in with. And by the second session, I was like really, really loving it. By the third session, I think I'd already decided I wanted to learn how to do it. It just seemed like such an amazing thing. And I was talking to everybody I could about it. So you've got to have kinesiology, you've got to have kinesiology. And I just thought maybe I should learn how to do kinesiology, and then maybe I could start helping people. So it happened really, really quickly. I think my first session was in April or May 2007. And I think by July I'd booked on to my first health kinesiology course, which would have been with you, Ben, but you were full. So
back in the days when I was still
the dates wouldn't tie in, or something happened. So yeah, I ended up going with somebody else, but we worked together in the end. The planets aligned, and just absolutely loved it. Just absolutely thrived on learning how to do it. I enjoyed working with clients. And I qualified in 2009, and pretty much sort of just took off. In terms of what keeps me passionate, I think it's just seeing people improve. It's seeing people come in with something that they have no expectation of seeing an improvement. They've seen everybody, or they've done everything they can think of, and it just makes a change, it makes a shift, or it makes sense. And you can't put a price on that. It's just so satisfying, you know, when you get those people who just have this amazing life transformation, you know, whether their relationships improve or whether they end their relationship because they know that relationship's not working, whether it's a physical thing that's been stopping them doing something. You know, a lot of people I work with, it's about personal development and growth, and it's getting them suddenly powering through something they didn't think they could do. And it's just continually thrilling. You know, it doesn't get boring. Every session, while the structure's the same, the sessions are different, and I just love it. And it's I find it quite an easy job to do. You know, it's like I don't have to sit there thinking, oh right, this person's coming with this, what do I need to do to help this person, what do I have to do? It's like, right, I sit down and I communicate with the body tells me what is stressful, it highlights the stress, and then it tells me what we need to do to correct that stress. You know, it's perfect. Apparently I like being told what to do. You believe that, you'll believe anything.
There's something about in the big mind work, the Zen training that I've done with Genpo Roshi, one of the voices, one of the spaces that we talk into is the follower of the way. And there's something about being the follower of the way that's just a place of ultimate relief, because we don't have to do any thinking. We follow the signs. And we are, you know, there's another school of kinesiology that in its subtitle calls itself the way of the tracker. And I think that's a beautiful way of describing what we're doing in kinesiology. I mean, you know, my father was an engineer in the RAF, so I often reduce it back in one sense to mechanistic terms and talk about it that we're circuit testing. All we're doing is looking for the space where the normal flow or the normal behavior within the system is breaking down, and then what is it that's causing the break, and what is it that we need to re-establish flow again, whatever that is, again, whether it's physical, emotional, mental. environmental, relational, subtle. There isn't a space where, if we have the openness to be with it, that we can't work into and we can't explore. So it's perfect in that way.
Yeah, it's lovely. I mean, thinking again about the body as that sort of factory analysis or a vehicle, and it's like if part of that factory system isn't working, it's like if you're looking at the body, say, as a car plant, and they've got the vehicle bodies ready and they're waiting for the engine, but there's a delay because there's a problem in wherever the engines come from, then that system stops working, the system that follows that stops working, and eventually the whole system shuts down because one component hasn't been able to track along and keep up with the system. And as soon as you find out what that breakage is, and like I said, circuits is a great way of looking at that. Once you fix that circuit and the factory starts running again, all of those components start to follow through, and so that we can enjoy riding along in our body clueless as to what's going on.
Definitely. So, and over the years, and again, you and I have had many conversations over the years about various bits, but I know that my practice has evolved, and there is, anybody that listens to me long enough or reads any of the stuff knows that I'm a little bit of a rebel, and knows that I like to test boundaries, and I like to test the edges of things to find out if they're congruent. And a lot of what I've done over the last 18 years as well is test the things that I wasn't sure about, to find out whether or not the rules that were given to me, really do apply. And I've certainly changed a lot of that over time. And now there are certain pieces of work I do in certain ways, other pieces of work I do in other ways, because I've found that those tend to be the most clinically effective, and they tend to give me the most consistent results over a period of time.
Mm.
But in your experience and in your practice, what do you consider to have been your evolution? What have you changed or expanded or let go of? Or, because you kind of talked a little bit about working more within personal development within people as well. So is there anything in particular that's changed for you over these last kind of 13, 14 years about how you practice and what you practice that is different from where you began?
It's a good question. I kind of feel, in essence, that I haven't changed the structure of what I do. I trained in health kinesiology. We had a very specific menu, and then we could attach anything into that menu. And in terms of working through that menu, I still pretty much stick to that format. I think possibly what has changed for me is at the time I guess one way I describe it is, when I was doing my training, I very much saw my kinesiology as a set of boxes which I worked through, and I was contained by those boxes. And once I'd finished all my training and I became a registered practitioner, I almost took the sides off those boxes. So I still had the framework, very much the structure of what I'd learned, but I took away anything that was confining me. And I think what really opened up again was, it was almost that subconscious thing. It was exploring the person's psyche in a different way, rather than thinking of it just in energy terms, thinking about a person as an individual and their experiences, and it opening up that way. A lot of what we do in kinesiology is holding points or tapping points to create, again, those circuits. And I found, or through my practice, that it wasn't always necessary to hold points. It's like there are so many different ways of bringing in the energy that a person needs. As we've said, it's like the body contains most of what it needs. It's more about repairing it, or bringing that information to the front, or repairing the information. And I just found that you could do that with so many more other tools, that I think it kind of opened up the energy aspect of what we could do. I'm not really sure that answers your question, or
Beautifully
not.
so, because in a way it sort of mirrors some of what I did, that initial structure, because you and I, for both of us, our primary kinesiology was health kinesiology, as it was, and it's natural bioenergetics now, isn't it?
It is now, yes.
Shifted into it. So, you know, that concept of a menu that for me was an internalized flow diagram, that we went
Yes.
from here to here to here to here, but where those heres were has over the years evolved because of other options. And
Yes.
you know, as you know now, I'm a really big kind of proponent of the epigenetic works of Chris Astle,
Yes.
because that biochemistry side of it and that restoring the functioning in the body to me has got a lot of interest. But that doesn't close down any of those psychological or subtle energy or environmental aspects that are still there. They just have a proportion that comes up when they're needed. And the types of clients that I tend to attract, you know, you'll get varying amounts of it. And I think that as much reflects where my development went, as much as then the types of people that I ended up seeing. So it was, for me, back in the early days, it was a lot more subtle energy work.
Yes.
In terms of those more kind of new age pluralistic concepts within kind of chakras and subtle bodies and other aspects like that. And now I find that I less need to describe things in those terms to be able to affect those aspects within an energy system, you know, which for us is that total psychophysiological being, rather than something that's separate from the physical.
Yeah, because I found as well, once I started doing interpersonal skills, that I became really interested in the counselling aspect as well. So rather than just getting a client in, popping them on the couch and seeing what the body had to tell us, it is interesting to see what is in the conscious brain, and getting the conscious brain it's almost like exercising it. It's like, you know, there are levels of the subconscious, and there are those subconscious ideas that poke into the brain but don't quite reside there, and so people are kind of aware of things. And I just think, the counselling aspect, getting people to think and challenging them on their thoughts and their beliefs, just can help to set up little ideas that, again, it just changes the energy. It's like, because energy is everything, it doesn't take much of a change of energy to have a knock-on effect and an impact. You know, like, I guess, like stacked dominoes, you know, you push one over and it can have a massive impact on the next domino. But also the shadow work that I've done with you, it just opens up, again, another dimension of where people are. You know, listening to them talking, hearing where they have problems in their life, and then thinking, actually, this problem comes straight back to you. That gives us a starting place. You know, they don't need to know what shadow is or necessarily work with shadow in that way, but it's enough to get an idea from that person where their mind is. And I just find that a really useful place to start with people. I think kinesiology, from a men's point of view, I find this with men I've worked with, is they don't want a talking therapy. They don't want to discuss their feelings. They don't want to talk about their problems. They just want to lie on the couch because, again, their wife's told them to come, or their girlfriend or their partner or whatever. And you know, they're kind of doing it out of an obligation. And the number of times I'll see somebody and I'll hardly have a conversation with them at all. They just will not open up. And you do the work, and then you see them for the next session, and there's a little bit more opening up. You know, they talk to you, and then after 3 or 4 sessions, it can be difficult to actually get them to stop talking. So you can do any actual work. You know, we know it's all work anyway, but you know, it's incredible to see that, you know, when you give them permission to not speak, it's like, I don't need you to speak. I had a chap in a few weeks ago, and he said he'd done some talking therapy and hated it. And I said, that's fine. I said, I don't need you to talk to me. I said, I will ask you how you're feeling, and I'll ask you, you know, whether anything's come up. You can tell me to fuck off if you want. It's like, it's absolutely fine. Tell me what you want. Don't tell me what you want. Tell me to jog on. You know, it's your session. And he didn't need to tell me stuff. It's like, I was connecting with his energy, and I was working with him. I could feel his anger. I could feel his rage that he'd bottled up. And I was able to say, you know, it feels very angry, your energy. It feels like, you know, what you've come with is this huge sense of being let down by someone. And that's what it was. And it's like, you know, and you could see he was like a bit shocked that I kind of hit upon it. But again, it's that energy, you know, you as a practitioner, you're feeling it, you're aware of it. It's like, if you're processing these emotions, then I'm not going to feel them. But if you're not processing them, they're just going to bleed out. And the fact that I can feel it means it's bleeding out into the environment, and eventually everybody's going to feel it. You know, I did some work with a young lady beginning of the year, and she'd been in a house fire, and she'd been locked in her bathroom while her flat was on fire, and all the power had gone off, and it was incredibly traumatic for her. And we only did one session, and I said, oh, you know, with your energy, it feels like this is what's going on in your life. And she went, oh my God, it's taken 3 years of counselling for my counsellor to have said that to me, and you've done it in one session. And it's like, it's not because I'm a genius or anything, it's because your energy system's desperate. It's desperate to release this stuff. And I just can sometimes hear it, and if I can't hear it, your body will tell me through muscle testing. It's, how can you ever get bored of it, Ben?
Do you know, I never have. You know, I'm one of the, I think like you, one of the few people that doesn't mind coming back to work after a holiday because of the nature of the work we do is so enjoyable. And I think you kind of really covered such an interesting point that, you know, as a series of tools, we've got some great tools within kinesiology, but I think one of the things that's been most important to me over the years is actually my developmental understanding of psychology and how we develop psychologically, different stages we go through, different levels of inclusion, even from kind of egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric and so on, and just how we look at the world differently. And this is why it's been so important for me to do things like the relationships training I've done, do the shadow work, to do the integral transpersonal work that I've done, to look at all these other dimensions of just the mind.
Yes.
You know, and we you know, at the beginning of the podcast, we're talking about how, you know, we've got the Larry kind of character, still the passenger in the body, and having access to all that body information is great, but we can also help. And, you know, in my analogy with people, I talk about, you know, in the vehicle, are you servicing? Do you put quality parts in? What's the quality of the fuel?
Yes.
You know, and that's the mechanistic side of the vehicle, but the other side of it is how good a driver are you?
Yes.
You can be doing all the servicing, all the parts, all the things that look after the vehicle, and then driving like an idiot.
Yeah,
Or you
that's
can
a brilliant analogy.
Driver,
but
not do any of the servicing. And then on top of that, the fifth quality that I then look at is what were the roads like? You know, because we can't get away from those aspects of the internal self, that subjective self, the objective self, which is the muscles and the physical stuff that we're in, but then also that environmental side of it as well, the collective that we're all then engaged in. And it really is interesting to be able to work with all of those components and hold all those pieces in awareness, so we know that any of them could be the trigger. Do we need to change the roads? Do we need to change how you look after the vehicle? Or do we just need to improve your driving? You know, you want to go about it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of looking at it.
Yeah. So you also, I mean, one of the things, again, you know, even I don't know, even if I can find the words for it, I'm really proud of you as another man, as a person that's developed and done the work you've done and offered the work you did. So it was really exciting to me when in 2018 you were taken on board on the board of the Kinesiology Federation. And in 2019 you became chairman of the Kinesiology
I know,
Federation.
it all sounds so grown up.
We've got beards, look at us, grown up.
And reading glasses.
Yeah, sure. Well, these are actually just blue light glasses on me.
So fair enough. No, mine are very focal. I'm that old.
Brilliant. So tell me what it's like for you to have actually come to that place. And you know, I kind of look at our developments as creating increasing layers of complexity. So when it was just me, it's one thing. When it's me and others, it's another thing. When it's me and this group, it's another thing altogether. So what's it been like for you to kind of move up from that point where you decided to do your kinesiology because you were really interested in that side of it, to now be, you know, chairman of the largest kind of kinesiology organization in the UK?
Well, it's interesting you say it, because I actually met my original kinesiology practitioner for a coffee the other week, and I said to her, "Oh, isn't it weird that one day I turned up at your house for a session begrudgingly, and now I'm chairman of the Kinesiology Federation?" It's like, that is such a weird, you know, path. and I think you're right about that. You know, to start with, it's almost just you, and then you branch out and you meet other practitioners, and you branch out. And I think my reason for wanting to be on the policy board initially was that there are so many different schools of kinesiology, and even though in essence we're all doing the same thing, we all have different ways of doing it. And I'm very much about community and inclusivity, and I just thought, just be part of an organization that has all these different schools but sort of separate. And I thought, if there's a way of making it more of a collective and making us all more on the same page, then that's something I would really like to see. And I feel that's happening. You know, I really feel it with when we have meetings and we talk to the schools and everything that's going on, that there really is a nice melding of ideas. What was your question?
What's it been like?
What's it been like? Yeah. So yeah, it's been good, but it has been good. I mean, what's really interesting is, you know, I'll suggest an idea to the board, and then they'll just all go, oh yeah, and they just agree with me. And it's like, you know, sometimes I have to tell my wife, it's really, you know, it's amazing because people do agree with me sometimes. And you know, and it's like, it's the fact that we can have an idea or have a discussion and actually move things on in a really positive way, and to be part of that it feels really significant. You know, it feels like there is this legacy, and the Kinesiology Federation is 30 years old this year, and I've been interviewing some of the founding members and people who were on the policy board back then, and it's really heartening to hear where they came from, the reasons they felt we needed the federation in the first place, to think that we're kind of still carrying that torch for the work they've done, and that we're laying the groundwork for the next 10, 20, 30 years for the people that follow the current policy board members. And yeah, it's really empowering, and really it's very satisfying to think that we're doing things that are keeping kinesiology going, and hopefully growing it and raising the awareness of it. It's a nice thing to be a part of. It's hard work as well.
And I think that it is so important to have good, healthy organizational structures that can help to support people, to lead people, to give people that space for being part of a collective, because it can be a little bit of a lone working position in some ways. So it is really nice to take part of that. And, you know, I certainly know the main governing body that I'm with these days, the Association of Physical and Natural Therapists, who are the oldest UK therapy body and the largest. And I know that in the last year, it's been an incredible upsurge of work for them, given that physical therapists, close contact therapists, when the COVID situation began, and a lot of us had to then close down work. When we were looking at reopening again in July, of course, all the manual therapy work is actually in the same category as strip clubs and commercial sex work.
Yeah.
And it's the APNT who really spearheaded lobbying the government to get those categories changed, and to put us into our own bracket of work, so that as therapists, we weren't being considered as beauticians and hairdressers or as sex workers. And those were essentially the two category definitions that they were trying to find us in, rather than seeing the value of the work that we do to health. And
yeah, I think it did say an awful lot about where our industry is placed.
Yeah, and just the value within that. And the APNT went as far as to help us to connect into a union. So we're now part of Community, which is a trade union within the UK. So we actually have union representation within what we're doing. But, you know, from the Kinesiology Federation's point of view, how were your challenges over the COVID period, and how do you feel that you've been able to support the members within that through that?
Yeah, I mean, again, like you say, it was an incredibly tough year, and we had an awful lot of meetings. And again, it just showed how little information we were getting from the government, that we had to spend that long trying to unpick it and make sense of it, and make guidelines and advice for our members that meant that they were keeping themselves safe, weren't getting into trouble with any authorities, but were still able to work. And it was almost like, I almost felt like on a 2 weekly basis, you'd get a question from somebody that would just throw it all up in the air again. And you'd have to go back over all the guidelines, try and work out what was what. And yeah, it was incredibly difficult. And we got loads of lovely feedback from people. And I think that's another reason for being the member of any kind of organization like that, is it means you're not on your own. You're hopefully getting some help and some guidance from an authority, or, you know, a body that just helps you know where you're working and just makes you feel part of something, rather than, you know, God, am I having to do this on my own and make these decisions on my own? The federation is also part of the IHC, which is the Integrated Health Collaborative, which is an all-parliamentary body. So our connection with that's been really useful as well. So that's been lobbying the government, and again, as with your body, trying to get us classified as an essential part of people's lives. You know, it's like people don't come to see people like us for a jolly. You know, they come to see us because they've got stuff going on that they need to work through. And you know, some people may see it as a luxury, but for a lot of people it's more than that. It's essential part of their well-being and their, you know, keeping them safe. You know, you only have to look at suicide figures and things like that for the last sort of 16 months, which we don't need to go in, we won't bring it down. But again, it just shows that there's an element of our well-being that was not considered. And I think we were all working really hard to try and get that recognized as something that was as valuable as supermarkets for some people, you know.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I find it quite interesting as well. I can't remember if it was early in 2019 or early in 2020, but there had been a parliamentary discussion on the fact that, you know, the NHS, you know, bless its soul for what it's been doing for us for so many years now, was struggling with certain types of conditions, certain types of people, and it just didn't have the resources, B, have the kinds of specialisms that needed to deal, especially with some of those chronic conditions. And that the complementary health sector was actually the answer to that.
Yeah,
because it gave people that space, that time, that variation in approach that could then work with the things that they had in a way that the NHS wasn't as well geared towards.
absolutely.
And I think that's become a really important thing for me, is the fact that we've got to look at what a structure like the NHS is great at doing and let it do that. And then look at what structures like the kinesiology is good at, and other manual therapies and other complementary therapies, what they're great at, and let them do that. And not for us, you know, and not for a minute do I think that I replace a GP or that I replace a medical professional in the NHS, but I do complement them. And the things that they're not good at dealing with, I might be great at dealing with. And so when we start to understand that there is that combined role, and that we do have a place and a purpose within that, and we can make a massive difference to this country, it's great that organizations like the Kinesiology Federation, like the APNT, you know, BCMA, all of the organizations that are working with that are there just to help the health of the nation. And that's our real driving force.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, God, I absolutely agree with everything you've just said. You know, I'm a huge believer in the NHS and what the NHS is capable of doing. I'm also a huge believer in what we do. And, you know, my wife works for the NHS, and I mentioned earlier on about when my daughter was ill and the trauma I had with that. Well, the illness she had, there was no way she would have survived without the NHS, you know, and I always say the NHS saved her life. She would not have survived. And I also say that I don't think she would have been as healthy and recovered as quickly as she did had she not had all the energy work that was going on at the same time. It's like the energy work alone was not going to save her life. It couldn't have done. The NHS on its own would not have had her recover as well and effectively as she did on its own. You know, they marveled at how quickly she recovered, and you know, they said there would be stuff going on for the rest of her life and she would always need checkups. Well, they stopped when she was 2 because they couldn't find anything wrong with her. You know, it's I just, you know, I just think I would love to see the two things come together and absolutely support each other. And I just think it would just, the nation's health would benefit so much.
Yeah. And like everything as well, it's about finding that appropriate balance. It's around finding shared language and shared agreement around certain areas to make sure that, you know, when we are getting referrals, you know, and we do get referrals from medical clinicians, but I find that they tend to know us personally from that point of view. So they already understand how we're working as individual therapists, and they feel confident within that then to refer down to us. Whereas to be able to create a blanket referral system in the NHS, you know, we're still at a level, I think, where we're bringing training and standards and belief system and language up to a level that can be accepted by a mainstream model like the NHS.
And I mean, everything is moving in the right direction, obviously much slower than we would like, but that's the nature of it, isn't it? Look at Brexit.
Please, let's not look at Brexit. So what last thing I want to talk about future really, Phil, is the future. You know, so what are your plans at the moment? Where do you see what you're doing going over the next few years, and what's kind of got you fired up and excited within life in the future?
Yeah, I guess, are we talking sort of individually, what I would like to be doing, or where I see kinesiology going?
Both.
Oh, okay. Well, we've kind of touched on that, I guess, where kinesiology is going in the same way that we would like all therapies to go, that it would become more mainstream, more accepted, but also have that feed in from the NHS and support the NHS as well. I think in terms of me personally, at the moment, I still love doing one-to-one work, but I think ultimately I would like to sort of branch out, and I don't know about doing workshops, and motivational speaking doesn't seem quite the thing, but somehow engaging with more people at once rather than just doing the one-to-one. You know, whether it's demonstrations or live workshops or something, I don't know, but yeah, I feel that as I progress through, I would like to be perhaps more visible in what I do, and reach a wider audience in one go. But in how that's going to happen or what's going to happen, I don't know. But you know, that's kind of what I would like. In terms of books and things like that and teaching, I've been asked whether I would like to teach, and the thought of teaching in itself is good. I think I could teach practitioners, but as we mentioned earlier on before we started the podcast, there's all the practical aspects and the admin aspects of teaching, which I'm less enthused by. So that, but again, you know, the idea is there, the seed is there, so it might lead that way. And I think at some point I would like to at least have a stab at writing a book, even if it's just one I end up writing for myself. I would like to get my experiences down, and you know, what I've learned about this world, and just see where it goes. You know, I just think, like I said, for my own sake, I feel I need to record it at some point, because the last what's it been, 14 years since my first session. You know, it's just been the most incredible ride. You know, I kind of didn't really say when I got into kinesiology, I went obviously with a physical thing, but I didn't realize how much anxiety I had, how little self-confidence and self-worth I had, how angry I was. You know, I you know, at the time when you're living your life, you just kind of, that is your life. But you know, looking back, I think, God, I did have such a hard time. I was having panic attacks and, you know, palpitations. And to me, that just seemed normal. And, you know, just my life was so small. You know, it was like, it was fine. It did what it needed to do. But everything was so carefully structured to keep me as safe as possible. And I guess, like when I was saying about the health kinesiology menu, which was all boxes, and I took the sides off, it became a structure, that I'd just been living in boxes. And it just opened up this incredible world for me, but also one that I'm then able to share in some ways with other people. And that keeps me fired up, mate.
Yeah, beautiful. And, you know, totally feel you on the whole admin thing as well when it comes to teaching. If there's one thing that I would always happily do less of, it's admin and paperwork. And you know, if anybody from TED Talks is listening, Phil and I are both available, you know, because that seems to be like a nice niche in the middle of not quite a workshop, not quite teaching, kind of public.
Yeah. There's something in there. I reckon we could, you know, bit of stand up or something. We could work something out.
Stand up, musical interludes as well. We could
absolutely, yeah.
Show, couldn't we? But
you know, I can do. I've got a few impressions I can do. Yeah, a bit of vaudeville. That's what we want.
I think it would be beautiful. Excellent. Phil, thank you so much for joining me here on the Integral Health Podcast today. If people want to get in touch with you and they want to connect with you and they'd like to come and see you for work, where can they do that?
My website is www.philclubley.co.uk. So there's information on there and details of getting in touch. I can be found all over Facebook and Instagram. So Facebook, I think it's Phil Clubley Kinesiology, and Instagram is philclubley.kinesiology. And there's, hopefully stuff on there that people might find of interest. But yeah, always available for a chat.
Thank you. And we'll make sure that the links for all of your Insta, your Facebook and your website are all in the description for the podcast today. So if you want to get in contact with Phil, all you need to do is click through to those links. I can highly recommend it. Physically, Phil, you're over in Humberside, aren't you? So if people want to come and see you, that is the location for them to jump in and find you.
Yeah, I'm over in Anlaby. I work from a wonderful little clinic called the Injury Clinic. Which again is a nice little collective of people doing different things, and it's just good to see people doing physical therapy, people doing energy work, and it all coming together in a collective whole. Yeah,
beautiful, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Phil. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you for joining the Integral Health Podcast today.
Oh, thanks, Ben, and for everything you've done on my journey as well.
Thank you. Yeah, always really appreciated. Thank you, everybody, for listening today. This is Ben Calder on the Integral Health Podcast, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future for another edition. Thank you. Take care, everybody. Have a great life.